So one of the things we ought to just do for a second is to slow down and say, okay, what is it that we mean by trust? Trust can be so ephemeral, but it's also really specific. And so there's actually an equation that Charles Green did that I really like because it kind of breaks it down. Can this person do what we've asked them to do? Will they do what we've asked them to do? And why are they doing it? So are their motivations clear to me, and therefore, their ability to do it is tied to their capacity? Then there's a denominator, which makes that whole equation change. Are your interests going to supersede our interests? And so this whole process of will you, can you, why are you doing it? And then, we basically cut all that down to size if we see the leader kind of taking care of his or her own interests versus the larger interests that we all share. So let's talk about why people will actually do something that is outside of their interests. And for that, let's turn to an organization called Patients Like Me. Stephen Haywood got sick with ALS, which is essentially a degenerative disease with 100% fatality. His brother Jamie, in trying to save Stephen's life, started figuring out all sorts of things from gene therapy, investment in future drugs, as well as figuring out how to gather a community of people together so they could do research more effectively. And it turned out all the other stuff sort of didn't work, but the community turned out to be really key. And it turned into this organization called Patients Like Me. And one of the things that they ask the patients to do is to share all their personal information for free. And the organization then sells that to pharmaceutical companies. So just think about that for a minute. You're going to give away all your own information, checking in about your weight, what drugs you're using, how well you're sleeping, your sexual activity, all sorts of things about yourself that you may not want to share. And you're going to do it to an organization that's going to make money off you. And the reason that it works is because, as Ed Slavov told me, I'm willing to give away something of me if it'll help the next person, the next guy. And in the case of most of the diseases that are on Patients Like Me, they really don't have a chance to be solved. Some of them are orphan diseases that are essentially uncurable. And what these people have banded together and done is figure out how to have a pool of data that wasn't present before. And in doing so, they're actually changing the ratio of how fast research can happen, because now they actually have enough people who have the same disease in one spot. They've lowered the cost of drug research. So what's going on in the Patients Like Me example, if you're a patient and you're trying to think about, should I give to this organization? Should I give them my data? They're going through that mental math of, will they do what they say they're going to do? Can they do what they say they're going to do? What is their motivation? And where are our interests aligned? So that trust equation is being put at play. Patients Like Me is saying, here's how we're going to use the information. They're adding transparency. They're showing with visibility what they've already done. So they'll show research that's been done as a result of the data they've gathered. And then they're actually showing why it still matters and why they're motivated, because since Stephen was the original genesis source of someone's life they were trying to save, they're basically trying to instill that same mission into everything else they're doing. That mental math is what allows all those people to keep contributing what they want to do, keep contributing their data, because they understand what the trade-off is. And that's what leaders have to do too, is by adding that transparency into, here's why I'm doing what I'm doing. It helps other people get committed behind them. And the same thing for each of us as individuals. If I don't actually share with you why I care and why I'm committed to something, you're less likely to trust me because you won't know what it is that I'm motivated by. So there's also ways in which all this stuff doesn't work. And so I thought sometimes it's helpful to have like an opposite example, a what not to do, to see what trust looks like in the wrong form. So in Boston, Massachusetts, a couple of years ago, there was a bombing situation that happened. And it was this terrible thing that happened as people were running across the marathon finish line. What should have been a great day of accomplishment turned into a day of terror. And people were killed right at that moment. Some people on Reddit started thinking, how could they contribute to solving that problem? And so somebody posted actually asking, hey, if any of you have pictures of the scene, maybe we can trace down who the people were that did this awful thing. They didn't specify that we needed to make sure that it was actually that person. They didn't specify that they would work with the police. They simply asked people to start uploading pictures. And slowly but surely, a lot of people got involved. Thousands of people, in fact, got involved and started sharing pictures and doing commentary. And one of the things that happened as a result of that is it became an exercise in trying to tag brown people, because the assumption was that the terrorist had to be a brown person. And so it became a Where's Waldo for a very racial sort of profiling. And while people had great intent of trying to help, they actually lacked the capacity to do it well. So in the trust equation, they had good motivation, but their ability to do this in such a way that actually let trust be built in the system was missing. They didn't have experts involved. And so what started off as good intention actually got really messed up. And so all these people, motivated entirely by the right things, wanting to sort of help protect our community, ended up doing absolutely the wrong thing. But that's because their ability to actually do something the way it should and could be done, their ability to actually make sure it's vetted so that the right person was identified, wasn't built into the system. So the one thing that leaders can do in thinking about how do I make sure a team can actually do great things is to make sure you're clear what the constraint is. So if the constraint is we have to identify people, but it has to be the right people, then that would have set up a very different sort of process mechanic behind what Reddit did. One of the things that happens when I work with teams is people will say, I really want to let everyone do their own thing, but what happens if it all goes wrong? And so I wrote a several thousand word piece for Harvard Business Review that I'm going to draw on for this next vignette. TED, when it started off, was just a conference. And at some point, they decided to start posting videos online so ideas could be shared more broadly. And then at one point, they started saying, hey, a couple of us in the community itself would like to start hosting our own local events. Since then, over 7,000 TEDx events have actually been held around the world. And they've offered really innovative ways for ideas to come out. But along the way, some things have happened that weren't so great. When TEDx Valencia did a TEDx, they said it was going to be about science, but it turned out to be anything but. In fact, one of the actual talks was on the healing power of crystals. And nothing against crystals, but that's not the most scientific thing. And so the online world started seeing the news of this TEDx come out and said, oh my gosh, TED has lost control of its brand. Now, if you were the leader at TED, seeing this happen online, what would you have thought? More importantly, what would you have done? Well, what happened was that a bunch of people started having commentary about, oh my gosh, they've lost control. And instead of taking that one person who maybe led TEDx Valencia behind the woodshed and kind of going, what they actually said is, what does this mean? What could it mean for us as an organization? What could we learn from it? And how do we continue letting people have trust and charter in what they do and not suddenly take back all the control at the last minute? And how they did that is super instructive. First, they actually started having a conversation in the broader, larger community online to say, what is it we need to learn? And one person said, maybe people don't know the difference between science and non-science. And another person on another website said, here's a really good guideline resource. And another person said, maybe we could adopt that for the TEDx community, and so on and so on. Until ultimately the TEDx community as a whole, the organizers came together and said, this is what we want to do differently. This is how we'll learn. And more importantly, this is how we'll help each other do it better. The leader at TED could have come in and just been directive, right? He could have said, oh, we let it go too far. It's on me to come fix it. And instead, he actually let the thing run its course, which is, if I trust you to do all this great work without direction, why don't I also trust you to figure out how to fix it when it goes wrong? Now, I think leaders kind of hesitate because there's sort of this panic moment going on of, oh my gosh, everything just went wrong that I fear will go wrong. But if you give people time and guidance, they can actually find their way back to why they originally started doing it. And then you can improve their capacity to do it better. And by doing so, what you've actually said is, I trust in you to do it great.